The text says that Jonah went down to Joppa, and that's true on two levels. First, to get to Joppa, he had to go down to the seacoast port of Joppa. Second, by going to Joppa, he was really going down spiritually because he was disobeying God. And if you look at the action in the chapter, you see that Jonah went down 4 times. He went down to Joppa in verse 3. He went down into the belly of the ship in verse 4. He went down into the sea in verse 15. And he went down into the belly of the great fish in verse 17. I mean, there was nothing good about what Jonah was doing. He was going down everywhere he went. Now, here's the question. I got about 10 minutes. Here's the question. Why did the reluctant prophet run from God? Why did he do that? He didn't want to go to Nineveh. He didn't care about Nineveh. He didn't think God should care about Nineveh. He didn't want them to repent because he didn't think they deserved it. And in reality, he didn't want a God that loved people that much. And it was perfectly fine, like I said earlier, with him if God just sent them straight to hell and was done with it and he didn't have to fool with what God was asking him to do. In fact, it was his preference. Jonah's problem was never ultimately about Nineveh. The problem that he had was with God and what God was asking him to do. Now, here's the path Jonah took. So Jonah decides to run from God. He heads to Joppa where he just happens to find a boat that's going to where he wants to go. I mean, what are the chances? And isn't it amazing? Isn't it an amazing coincidence? I mean, it's a long way from Joppa to Tarshish. I mean, it's not likely they had a boat going from the two places every day. But here's the point. When we decide to disobey God, there's always going to be a boat going to Tarshish for us. And there's always room for one more passenger. I mean, what are the chances that a man would have the money in his pocket to pay the fare for a ship that just happened to be going to where he wanted to go? That never works out in my life. It's never that easy. When we decide to run from the Lord, though, here's the point. Satan is always happy to provide the transportation. So he found a ship. He paid the fare with the money that he had. And there's a whole lesson in that. I mean, money gives us options, doesn't it? If a man has no money, he can't buy a ticket to Tarshish. If you got money in your pocket and you're not using it for the right things, it may actually make it easier for you to run from the Lord. That's why I carry a debit card and usually have about $2 or $3, you know? And I'm just from that generation. Now, some of you that are older than me, you can't understand why people from my generation never have any cash. You know, I go somewhere with my dad, and he's got all this cash with him, and I've got like a debit card and $1.50. You know, I can't even get out. When I go make hospital visits, I've gotten stuck in the parking deck before and couldn't get out because I didn't have any cash to pay for the token. I have to go in there and say, hey, do y'all do that like clergy thing where we get out for free? I mean, it's, you know, when I was in college, I had a buddy who had figured that out. He's a drug rep. He's not even in the ministry, but his sister was in the hospital one time, and I rode with him to see her, and he had figured it out. I think he had ridden with his youth pastor one time, and we were at St. Vincent's, and we drive up to the thing, and I was like, what are you doing? And he said, watch this. He pushed the button, and the lady came on the speaker, and he said, clergy, and the little thing raised up, and we drove out. And I was like, man, that's dirty. But pretty cool. I remember that. So that's why I went into the ministry. God never really called me, but I thought, hey, I can park in parking decks for free for the rest of my life. So Jonah's decided to run from God. And you know, money can do it. I mean, it can, hey, listen, money's not a bad thing, but when you're not using it for God, it can be a bad thing, right? Now, in thinking about this, I pondered the excuses Jonah might have had for running from the Lord and going to Tarshish instead of Nineveh. I mean, here's a few things he might have said, and let's put them in our modern day terms, and we use these same excuses. I mean, Jonah might have said, well, God's just not calling me to Tarshish. Or he might have said, God's just not calling me to Nineveh. He's calling me to Tarshish. That's what I meant to say. Or he might have said, that, you know, they need the Lord in Tarshish too, so I'm going to go there. Or he might have used the old prayer card, well, I prayed about it, and God really wants me to go to Tarshish. I have peace in my heart about that decision. I mean, how many times have I heard that when somebody telling me, well, I have peace about it, and what they're doing is not biblical. How can you have peace about it? You have peace about it because you're okay with your sin, not because God said it's okay. Well, the ship just happened to be there, so it must be God's will. I mean, how many times have we done that? I love Nineveh, but I'm not the right person to reach those people. I don't have that calling. Listen, I'm not very good at sharing my faith with people. Somebody else is going to have to do that. Hey, Pastor, I got somebody here that you need to share Christ with. How many times has that happened? And I don't even know the joker. But you do. And you're the one that God put there to lead them to Christ. I just feel like going to Tarshish. It feels like the right thing to do. It just feels good. Whenever we decide to disobey, we can always find an excuse, can't we? It's easy to justify wrongdoing. And as we stand back and we look at this story, a question naturally arises. How far will God let us go in sin? And I don't think anybody knows the full answer, but it appears that sometimes the answer is that God's going to let us go pretty far. He doesn't always just stop us quickly. He could have arranged things differently in this story so the ship went to a different port. He could have arranged things so the ship had no room for Jonah. God can do that. He could have arranged things so that a thief robbed Jonah of his money and he wouldn't have been able to get on there in the first place. But sometimes the judgment of God is simply that God lets us go on in our sin so that we have to face the consequences of our own disobedience. And that's the severe mercy of the Lord. That's why Romans 1, that's what it means when it repeatedly says that God gave them over. When a society decides that it doesn't need God, God says, if you want to jump off the cliff, I've warned you time and time again, but if that's what you want to do, I'm not going to stop you. And as we consider the beginning of Jonah's sad story, remember, we can run, but you know the old saying, we can run, but we can't what? We can't hide. God was with Jonah every step of the way. Though Jonah tried to leave the Lord never left him. It's the patience of God that allows us to run away. It's the wisdom of God that provides the ship. It's the providence of God that sends the storm that we'll see as we read along in this story over the next few weeks. And it's the kindness of God that sends the great fish. It was a good thing Jonah got swallowed by a whale. And if God didn't care, he would just let us live on in our sin forever. Now, as we move toward wrapping this up this morning, it looks like Jonah has gotten away with it. Just disobeying God and going to Tarshish instead of Nineveh. He's run from God. He's bought a ticket. Now he's on this ship for Tarshish. And it looks like, hey, I got away with that one. God probably missed that. He doesn't care about that. And it's amazing. You read verse 4 and 5, and it shows that God did care because God sends a great storm. But you can see how much Jonah's caring about it at the time because verse 5 shows us that Jonah cared so much that he was laying down in the belly of the ship asleep. It says in verse 4, but the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Verse 5 says, then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But here's how much Jonah cared at that time. I'll just disobey God. I guess it won't matter. I think I'll go take a nap. But Jonah had gone down, it's what it says, into the inner part of the ship, and he had lain down and was fast asleep. But God's not through yet. He's just getting started. If you could write anything over this story, it would be Proverbs 14:12. It says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. There's a way that seems right to a man. Your sin may seem right. It may feel good. It may look good. It may be tempting. You may think, hey, I can get away with this. It may seem right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Jonah's nap was going to come to an end. It ain't over till it's over. God wasn't letting Jonah get off the hook so easily. Now, 3 final thoughts. They're real quick. 3 thoughts to ponder as we kind of finish. Every step out of the will of God is always a downward step. No one ever disobeyed God and went up and improved. You only go down to Joppa, down in the ship, down into the sea, down into the belly of the great fish. Secondly, we may get away quickly, but we recover slowly. It may seem like a good thing. You think you get away with it. Recovery is going to be hard sometimes. It's easy to go down, easy to get off the right path, easy to fall into sin. But the road back is difficult and very painful. Third thing, just remember this, Satan is sneaky, but he's not God. He's sneaky. Satan has ships. He always has room on his ships. His ships always go where we want them to go at the time when we're running from God. He can make disobedience look really good by means of favorable circumstances. I mean, as Jonah took a nap, as he got ready to take a nap, he may have thought, things are going really well for me right now. This must be God's will to disobey him because, boy, this is going good. See, the Lord had already made his will clear. No set of favorable circumstances can override what God has clearly said. Down deep, he knew God's will. He just didn't want to do it. Now, I began today's message by talking about grace. And let's close it with that. Where is the grace in this story? Jake, if you want to come, we're going to close with a song. But the answer is simple. The grace in it is that he let Jonah disobey. And you may say, what in the world do you mean by that? You see, God could have killed Jonah on the spot when he disobeyed, but he didn't do that. It was grace. God works through grace even in the midst of our disobedience to bring us to himself, doesn't he? I mean, his disobedience looked good. Happy sailing, Jonah. Watch out for that big fish. It's coming. I mean, sin's fun for a while, but be not deceived. God is not mocked. Jonah's about to find out the hard way. He's about to get swallowed by a whale, and he's going to have 3 days, we'll find out, to think it over real hard. 3 days in the belly of a fish to think it over. And I just ask you to kind of stay tuned because it ain't over till it's over, is it? It ain't over till it's over. Let's stand and let's worship together. Let's sing and listen to the buzz. Let me invite you as we sing and as we worship, as we do this together.